Okay. All right. So we're going to talk, like I said, about apartheid. And the major thing that I want you to understand about apartheid is it meant to separate. Okay. Looking at where South Africa is, you can see it's really far away from a lot of the more advanced first world nations up here in Europe, Middle East. You have India over here, but the fact that it was kind of isolated from the rest of the world allowed these policies to take hold, and they didn't really feel a lot of social pressure. Um, but we're going to learn that South Africa that caught up with them. Okay. First of all, we should kind of talk about how they started. Much like other parts of Africa, it was basically a colony of other places. It started off in the beginning as a Dutch colony. The Dutch settlers went in there and they went ahead and they took over, and they had farms, and they were growing food, and they were living kind of almost peacefully with the people that were indigenous to the area. And then the British came in and they had a war with them for the territory. It's called the Boer War. I know. A war is always good when it rhymes, right? The Boer War was basically the entry point to Great Britain getting involved in this area. All right, so way back in 1685, there was the first policy put in place of white superiority, okay, which meant that the people that lived in the area immediately became second-class citizens, which meant they got less of a fair treatment than the other people that were in power. Okay, the way I like to kind of talk about the structure of government there and society. If you remember way back when we talked about an oligarchy, and it's like a small group of people have power, you can apply that to South Africa. In this case, where sometimes in the places it was kind of like a political belief that led you to be in power. In this case, it's something as trivial as the color of your skin. All right, it's not the content of your character, as Martin Luther King said. It's not your ability to lead or your worthiness. It was literally, if you had the right color skin, you would be given an advantage over other people. All right, extremely, extremely biased, extremely disgusting. But that was really like the core policy that ran their government. All right. So in 1865, they started to roll out these laws, and first of all, it was to separate whites from the indigenous people, and saying that it was illegal for a settler to marry an African, okay, someone who was indigenous to this area. All right, let's talk a little bit. Remember, we talked a lot about art. Remember when we looked at like propaganda posters and all that stuff? You guys remember that? Yeah, come on, wake up. Give me some comments. You guys remember that? Only one who probably doesn't should be Eric, because he was in New Jersey. All right, so I want y'all to look. I want y'all to look at this picture. Okay, first of all, let's look at who. The artist was probably Dutch. The Dutch East India Company was a big trade organization. But I want you to kind of look at this picture closely and give me some observations. Okay, what kinds of things do we see in this picture?
The Africans.
What about the Africans?
They're poor.
They look poor. They're not highlighted, right? What about their body language looks a little like timid and intimidated, or in awe, or in reverence. They're sitting down. They're looking to these gentlemen right there. What do we notice about the explorers here, the Europeans? What do we notice about their? They got weapons. Yeah, I mean that's a big gun right there. They're
wearing nice clothes.
Nice clothes, absolutely. Carrying a big flag, that'd be the Dutch flag, right? I think they're sitting on crates here. That might be like gunpowder or something like that. There's a bunch of them in the background. They're kind of moving in. You know what I'm saying? They're not. They doesn't look like it's just a quick stop by. It looks like they're bringing a lot of supplies, and they're kind of taking over. And also, if you look at the lighting, Okay, what is the light? What is the light shining on?
The Dutch.
The Dutch, right? A lot of those things are little nuances, and that's why I love art. But I also love like the message that art tells people. And in this message, it's basically saying it's kind of like an enlightening. Oh my gosh, the Europeans came to save the day. You know, here they come in their fancy clothes and they got weapons and they're all look like they're put together and they're saving the Africans from themselves. And I think honestly, it's a wrong message. But this would be a painting that would be brought back to Europe and or it would be displayed in Europe, and it would actually be like promoting this kind of colonization. And that's why I love this. A lot of people just skip through these pictures, but if you look at it, there's a lot in there, and there's a reason and purpose for why the artist actually painted it and why it was displayed. All right, and it's kind of a wrong message that's being sent. All right, Africans had been there for a long time. They had systems of government. They were sustaining themselves. They did not necessarily need Europeans to help them get back on their feet. Okay. All right. So moving forward, the settlers came to South Africa, and it was pretty much the hub of where the most settlers came. Okay. There was more Europeans that went down in this part of Africa than any other part. So in 1910, right? And here's the thing: let's keep an eye on these dates because this wasn't that long ago. All right, this is 110 years ago, not very long ago. In 1910, Great Britain established the Union of South Africa, which basically made it more official. Okay, it made it a more official colony, and it was on its way to becoming the country of South Africa. All right, but when they established this, they said that only whites could be given governing power, which means any public office within the country of South Africa was only open to people of the ethnicity of European, Anglo-Saxon. Their skin would be white, and that would automatically give you like a pass to be in the government. Okay, not very fair, is it, guys?
No.
All right. Do you think that group of people was necessarily concerned with the welfare or the happiness of the Africans? No. And guys, we're talking probably the if you look at the population at this time, it's probably about for every 10 people, probably about 9 of them would be African. Right. So we're talking about a very small group that was in power, but their power was enormous because the other people basically were at the will of this small group. That's an oligarchy, okay? And like I said, we in the past have kind of defined it by like only a certain group gets to get power, maybe because they are connected, but in this case, it's because of literally the way they looked. So in 1948, a political party came to power, and like I said, we see a lot of stuff happen around 1948, don't we? All right, think about this year, what we've learned. Israel was created in 1948. A lot of the turmoil in Europe that we spoke about last year, the Cold War and all that started right at this time. It should be no surprise because it's right after the Second World War. All right. After World War II, Great Britain was devastated. They can no longer hold on to their colonies like Palestine, and they also could not hold on to their colonies like South Africa. And they allowed them to kind of rule themselves a little bit. In this case, that freedom was not a good thing for South Africa, in my opinion, because basically what it did is allowed this party of people that wanted the law to favor only whites to grow in power. All right, so they actually put in a bunch of laws known as apartheid. Okay, apartheid basically means that you're going to separate people by the color of their skin. Now, we can look at our history in America, and we know our history is not void of issues between people of different races. We've had issues, and thankfully, great men like Martin Luther King have helped bridge that gap and make people more equal. And you look at our country today, there's equality that is unprecedented. There's still issues, but it's better than it's ever been, in my opinion. But in South Africa, this was a policy that reached everybody. Okay, it wasn't just like an implied thing. Like a lot of the problems that we've had, especially in the South, back in the 1950s and 60s and earlier, it was almost kind of like an unwritten rule kind of thing. But in South Africa, it was the law. Okay, it was the law that you had certain responsibilities, honestly, to discriminate against other people, and that's an incredibly horrible thing. And we're going to see a little bit about that. All right, so here you see the National Party, and obviously representation looks appropriate. There's no one of other than white people on this, and they were making the rules and the framework for the country and how it would be run. All right, so the National Party, basically to enforce this law of apartheid across all of South Africa. Okay, it meant every aspect of your life. It meant who you can hang out with, who you cannot hang out with, where you can go, where you could not go, what bathroom you can use, what bathroom you could not use. It had all sorts of rules specifically meant to diminish the human rights of the people that were not white in the country. And it was extremely, like I said, I'm going to show you some pictures in a second, some of the signs that were posted. But it's hard to comprehend living in a place like this. Okay. And you can see right here, Afrikaans, okay, is basically the language of the South Africans. If you've ever been familiar with people that speak Spanish, sometimes they get like it's called what is it, Spanglish, where it's a little bit of mixture of English, a little bit of Spanish. It's kind of a hybrid language of people and what they use daily. This is also Afrikaans. All right, so basically Afrikaans was a combination of Dutch and English. It shouldn't be a surprise because you have people from both countries represented in the population. And you also have a little bit of African language in there as well, but mostly Dutch and English. All right. So apartheid definition means separated or apartness, which means that people of different races needed to be separated by society and law. All right. So here's some pictures that would be common. Okay. You can see extremely harsh language there. Caution, beware of natives. Natives would be probably a terminology that they would put on anybody who is not white, people that were indigenous to this part of the world prior to colonization. But you can see that there's all kinds of things. There was no ambiguity about it. If you were not white, you were not permitted to be in certain areas by law, and that should be like kind of a mind blow for everybody, because that's the opposite of what our country strives to be. And at this time, it was the way they kept their, or they thought the best way for them to keep their way of life. So I'm going to look at this real fast, and here's another collection of pictures. You can see that bathrooms were segregated. Also, like areas that had a high population of Africans, they would put all kinds of signs to warn the whites that this would be an area that would not just be populated by whites. But you can also see like extremely like disgusting right here. Natives, Indians, colors. And that's one thing that we saw. Do you guys remember when we watched the Gandhi movie before Christmas? Y'all remember that? When we watched the beginning of that movie?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember Gandhi was on a train and he got kicked off? And the porter on the train, who was African, he said, "What are you doing here in first class?" And Gandhi's like, "I'm a lawyer, and I'm from England." And the train conductor, or the coach conductor, literally was abusive. Then he threw him off the train, regardless of his stature or his credentials. They threw him off because of the color of his skin. And then also the next scene showed Gandhi actually burning ID cards. And he did that because it was a sign of civil disobedience against these laws of apartheid. All right, so people that were of all ethnic backgrounds. It could be people that were from India, people that were from, if you were African American and you went to South Africa, you were treated just like any other African that was there. It was basically you were either white or you were non-white, and the non-whites had no law. I had no rights. Okay, but you can see like all the intimidations. You'll be shot on sight. Dogs will devour your corpse. I mean, come on, y'all. Europeans only. These amenities have been reserved exclusively for white people. Beaches that were only designated for people of that by the color of their skin. So you could see that this was a society that was based on racism. Okay, and you were expected to be racist, or you would not be. Your life would not. You would be held accountable to laws that were designed to basically also treat people that were not following the laws severely. Right. So it wasn't just if you were, let's say, if you were white and you did not believe in apartheid. If you broke these laws, you'd be held accountable. All right. This is what's crazy about this situation. It was throughout their DNA of their rule of law that you're expected to follow all the laws of apartheid. They were not like voluntary. Go back here. Okay. So here's another picture. You see that there are separate facilities for whites and non-whites. And then we're going to kind of stop right here today. Basically, there was what was called the Bantu Authorities Act. It was in 1951. So, guys, we're talking less than 60. We're talking like less than 70 years ago. They basically started to create what is called homelands for the Africans, the Black South Africans. So, what do y'all think these homelands were? You think they were nice areas?
No.
No. Okay. So where at least there used to be like small like places within the country that were all scattered around, where there'd be villages and towns where the population might be primarily Black South Africans. They decided that they were going to start to have these homelands, and in some ways you can kind of compare it in a way where Native Americans in America have reservations that are specifically set aside for them. It was very similar in the way that they set up these homelands, and you have to understand that like 80% of the land was owned by 10% of the population. All right, so a very small group of people owned most of the land legally, and they wanted to say, well, we want all the land. So they took the worst land they could find, void of all kinds of ability to farm or natural resources, and they started to set up these homelands for Black South Africans. Okay, very, very, very unfair. Okay. All right, so I'm going to get into this one. We're going to leave on this slide, all right? And I'm going to try to zoom on it. Let's see. All right, can you all see it zoomed a little bit? Yeah, no? All right, I'm going to read some of these. Now, this would be something you would see in a public place. You might see this in a post office. You might see this in a government building. You might see this outside of a store, or maybe on a bus stop or something like that. But this shows you how far-reaching these discriminatory laws were. Okay, and I'm going to read a few for you. Basically, it says anyone disobeying these laws will be imprisoned, fined, and or whipped. Okay, so basically, they're saying that physical punishment will be an option, and you notice it says anyone, which means that the expectations are both on the black South Africans and the white South Africans to follow these same laws. So let me throw a few by you, and you can kind of start to understand the distasteful nature of this rule of law. All right, so it says all South Africans under the age of 16 must produce a passbook and be able to put it on demand, which is the same thing you saw Gandhi burning in that film. And it says, under no circumstances may an employer pay Africans the same rates as a white person, even if they do the same work. Okay, here's the deal, guys. This was the law. And this is where I want you all to kind of like understand, like, even though like in some countries, we still look at things like in America where there's, women might not get paid the same as men in some situations. It's something that we're trying to correct as a society. This was the law. You were not able to without being penalized. So if you were an employer and you had, 5 employees and 4 of them were African and 1 of them was white, and you didn't pay the white more than you paid the Africans, you were in violation of the law, and you could have imprisonment, fines, or maybe even be whipped. It worked on both sides. All right, you could not. Your conscience didn't allow you to be doing the right things because the law said you were not allowed to. All right, and you can see here it took away Africans' right to strike. Strike means if you don't agree with your employer for some reason, you're not allowed to protest that. If an African takes a job outside of his town, if he has lived there for more than 20 years, he must leave that town. Okay, so you basically are kicked out of your own town if you if you take a job outside of your hometown. You're kicked out, and then you have to have permits to be with white people. Okay, so which is crazy. No white person. Basically, if you have a birthday party, there's only a limited number of people that can attend. Okay, so you can see that there's all kinds of different laws which were set up to basically separate society. Okay, the last one is really horrible. Like, no white man may teach an African servant to read. Okay, so basically what they were trying to do is shackle people with illiteracy. Okay, because if you don't know how to read, then you don't know how to learn or cannot learn and gain an education. And if you can't gain an education, you can't empower yourself to do great things, right? And I think that's a perfect place to stop right there, because this is kind of a place where when we start to talk about the one man that really turned the tide of everything in South Africa, Nelson Mandela, he was taught to read. He was taught, he got a formal education. And it was that education which allowed him to free South Africa. And it's an amazing story. So I want to kind of stop right here at the climax of what South Africa was. So how do y'all feel about that? Give me some feelings. Like, what do y'all feel about like the idea that a country could be set up with this kind of rules? Give me some impressions.
I'm wondering what the government was thinking.
Yeah. All right, fear, right? It's based on fear, I think. So I think this is a good place to stop today. All right. And like I said, we'll continue this next Tuesday. We'll finish up South Africa and then we'll move on to something else. But I like that we got this far today. All right. Does anybody have any questions for me before I take off? Because I got to get to my next meeting. No? Okay. All right, guys. Have a great weekend. Take care of your mama. Make sure she feels nice and appreciated. And if you guys need me, go ahead and instant message me. All right, guys?
All right.
All right, y'all. Good seeing y'all. I'll talk to you soon.
See ya.
All right. All right. Good morning, everybody. Whoops. Morning, guys. How's everybody doing today? Vivian, you've never looked better. Just kidding. There you go. How are y'all doing this morning? Everybody good? Good. Miss Jensen, how are you doing?
Hello.
Hello. Everybody's afraid to put their microphones on. All right. So today we're going to talk about a really sickening policy. All right. Does anybody know anything about South Africa? A little bit?
Yeah.
What do you know?
Well, I used to live there, and what kind of information?
All right. So I'm sorry. Who's speaking right now?
Person?
So tell me a little bit about when did you live there?
When I was until I was 4.
Until you're 4. So really early. Now, did your family live there a while, or how long did they live there?
Yeah, they lived there for 7 years.
Awesome, dude. You're going to be the best asset for me. All right. So all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the history of South Africa, and it's not pretty, right?
Yeah.
It's not pretty, but there's a great lesson in it. And I think, honestly, the reason why we learn history is so you can learn not to make the same mistakes. All right? Because if we didn't do that, we would do the same things over and over again. And honestly, the history of South African is pretty vile. It's pretty disgusting. The way they discriminated against people was unprecedented. Okay, I mean, it never happened this way. A lot of the reason why they were able to do it is because of their location. They were kind of so far away from other people that their policies were kind of ignored for a long time. And then finally, great people came and they helped abolish it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of set up the whole thing as our story, and we're going to stop when it looks the worst. All right. And then on Tuesday, I'm going to tell you what the solution was and how eventually it did get better. All right. But here's the deal. I want you to picture this under the terms like this. Okay. Our country's had plenty of issues, right, when it comes to race relationships. If you look at our history from the earliest days, European settlers and how they had issues with Native Americans, all the way through to slavery, all the way through our civil rights movement. We've had issues in this country before when it comes to this. The thing about South Africa, which is extremely troubling, is the fact that it was the law that they had to act in a racist manner. And even if you were a person that did not believe in treating people unequally, then you would be in violation of the law. Okay, so it's kind of crazy. So I need to kind of we often talk about when we're learning about the world, how lucky we are here. I want you to step away from our American point of view where we try to make everybody equal, equal despite your gender, despite your ethnic background. Everybody, we try to strive for equality. This was not about that. This was about making one group more powerful than another group. And they did it by design. Okay? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So it's kind of touchy, right? Everybody it should make you feel a little like you ate something bad, all right? When you hear some of this stuff, you should be like, ew, how could they treat people like that, right? Why would they do that? But that's a good thing because what we use that kind of feeling of disgust, and it really should make us always remember how important it is for us to protect everybody. Because in South Africa, they didn't, okay? So here we go. We're going to roll into this, and let me go ahead and get my presentation right. And then we're going to really kind of just see how this would even be possible. 1 second.